Hi guys, welcome to Free Tutorial TV and Python course for the All for Beginners. Now before starting our object-oriented programming journey in Python, let's discuss about what is there. Difference between procedural programming and object-oriented programming. So you will have a better idea of why we use object-oriented programming, not traditional programming. Languages such as C or Pascal would call the procedural programming languages or structural programming. Languages where the basic unit was functions. Now programming in these type of procedural languages involves choosing a data structure and then designing the algorithm and then translating that algorithm into a code. So if this sounds a little bit confusing, let me try to explain it with an example. So let's say you have been given a task to create a program for the passenger who wants to travel from one place to another place using our cab service. So if we think from the point of view of procedural programming, what we do in the procedural programming is we create some global data structure which holds the data. So here, for example, we create some kind of the structure which can hold that data. For example, in case of our cab service, which cab service is it, order which type of job is it, and at what location this guy is standing. All these kinds of data are stored in a data structure. Now after storing the data, we design an algorithm. So let's see what kind of algorithm we can develop in the procedural programming language for our cab booking service. So this is a pseudocode which I have written. So first of all, the passenger will open the app from which he can book a cab, and then he will book their cab. And once the cab is booked, he will wait for the cab, and then once cab arrives, he will sit in the cab. And then he will reach to his or her destination and he will pay the fare of the cab. And this is the pseudocode of that algorithm, and then we will translate this algorithm into actual code in procedural programming language. Now in these type of procedural programming languages, we concentrate on creating the functions, and their major drawback of using these functions is that data and operations on that data are separated. That means we need a methodology to send data to these functions. So here we need to send the data which we have saved globally into these functions, and these functions take this data either as argument or as a global variable, and then perform some actions on this data and give you some result. Now these kind of functions are passive. What do I mean by passive here? That is, the kind of function cannot hold any information inside them. So once you give the data, that they are able to give you the result back after performing some operations. But they cannot save or hold the US state or the data, so that if you want to use the data in some other place in your code, then it will be very difficult using these kind of functions which you use in procedural programming. So let's look at the object-oriented approach of doing things. So in object-oriented programming languages like C++ or Java or Python, the basic unit is to last. Now if we take the same example of a passenger who wants to travel from one place to another using a cab service using object-oriented programming thinking, which depends upon the creation of object, we can create different kind of object. For example, for a cab you can create a class called cab. And then we can create a class for cab driver. And the third class we can create for a passenger. Okay. So a class you can create for any real-life object. It can be a car, it can be a motorbike, it can be a book or employee or a person. So object-oriented programming allows us to create object. So first of all, what is a class? So a class, we are forced to a blueprint in which we can have data and math towards. Okay. So for example, for a cab class, what attributes this cab class can have? For example, a cab service, which cab service we want to take. What is the make of the cab? It is a door-to-door or a BMW or a Volkswagen car. At which location this cab is right now? What is the number of that cab? So the passenger can recognize this cab. So all these things which I have written here are called data because they can hold some kind of data. Or number plate data, location of geolocation data may have to make data gaps of is can have they don't like UBR or any other cab service. And the other thing which last can have are called mattered. So earlier we have seen that we can create functions, and when these functions you use inside a class, they are called mattered. Okay, so functions inside a class are called metered. Now the data inside this object or class is called attributes, or the member variables which can hold some data. And using this class we can create object of that cab class, which means we can create different object using the same class. And how to create object using classes we will see in the next video, in the real life example. So don't worry if you don't understand how these things works. I will give you a real life example, so you will be able to understand in a better way. Now what is an object? An object is a software unit that combines data and matter words. Okay, so we have this data here, and then we have the metal rods inside the glass, and object is able to combine the both of them, which is the with the metal rods. Now these object, for example a cat object and the passenger object, can exchange the data between them also. So data is interchangeable between, for example, the passenger object and cab object. So let's rewind once again what we have learned about object-oriented programming. So the basic unit in object-oriented programming is a class, and a class we are forced to a blueprint which can have the data and math towards. Now using a class we can create objects. And what is an object? Object is an instance of a class, and each object can have its own data and metered, and an object is able to store the state of some kind. So at which location this cab is right now, this is a state, and object is able to store that state. Now in procedural programming, if you remember, there is no relation between the data and the method. Right. We need to provide that data to the method, which are separate entities in the procedural programming language. Now these data members are called attributes or member variables, and these functions which you define inside that class are called meta words. And what are some of the key differences between procedural programming language and object-oriented programming language? The first is the unit in procedural programming languages function, and on the other hand in object-oriented programming the unit is class. The second is the procedural programming concentrate on creating functions, while object-oriented programming starts from isolating classes, and then they can have data and matters inside it. In procedural programming language the data and the functions are separate, and in object-oriented programming language they in matters are not separate. They are part of a single object of our class. Now if all this seems to be a little confusing to you, don't worry, you are not alone, and I will try to solve this confusion in the next video, in which I will tell you how to create the classes and how to use classes and buttons. So stay tuned. And please keep watching these videos. And like the video. Subscribe the channel. And do share the video to all your friends and family. I will see you in the next video. Have a nice day.